The hidden horrors uncovering the brutal truth of slave breeding farms in America and the Caribbean. The transatlantic slave trade ripped millions of Africans from their homes, transporting them and enslaving them across the Americas under brutal conditions. With the slave trade eventually being abolished in the 19th century, plantation owners in America and the Caribbean turned towards slave breeding farms and programs to replenish their labor force. These farms subjected countless slaves to systematic rape, torture, family separation, and subhuman treatment solely to produce more children to be sold into slavery. From slaves to former slaves to the descendants of slaves, slave breeding has a bitter memory, one that is connected to exploitation, memories of victimization, and of course, these memories live on. And let me also indicate that after emancipation, not much was said about slave breeding. But as we went through the civil rights period, Black academics started to explore the concept and what took place. We now have a body of knowledge that we can explore. And of course, I will share some insight with you as regards to the source for this presentation in the description of this video. At times, our historical representation sometimes neglect the effort by various organizations and people in moving towards the freedom of the Black people. And as you might have heard about the abolitionists, many of them were white individuals struggling and fighting for the freedom of Black people. The reality is that slave breeding was the forceful reproduction of new generations of slave labor for resale and for sale. In summary, it was really an immoral sort of commodification of Black individuals. And this took place in the Caribbean and North America on various plantations. It is impossible to talk about slave breeding without talking about the emotional issues and, of course, the physical abuse given to slaves during this time. Let us face the fact, the anguish caused when a husband and a wife and a child were separated and sold from a family must have been awful. And these memories would have been etched in the minds of many. In America, it is estimated that 70 slave breeding farms operated at their peak. And these farms were operated by wealthy planters who saw it as a lucrative business. They carefully selected and paired male slaves with female slaves based on their physical fitness and health to breed offsprings with more profitable attributes. Female slaves endured repeatedly being forced into rape, pregnancy to bear children, and only to have these children to be sold at the age of 5 or 6. Some American farms even became sex farms, where young enslaved girls were abused by masters. Similar horrors played out in the Caribbean, where sugarcane plantation owners had immense demand for labor. So breeding farms were put into place to maximize pregnancies and birth by any means. Once these girls started puberty, they were connected with multiple men. Children were repeatedly sold away after a few years of their birth, leaving mothers in drama. It was said that the abolitionists were very successful in stopping the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, if you stop the labor force from entering, planters will find a way. So in the Caribbean, plantation owners found another way to get their labor source. And it's so ironic that you stop the Atlantic slave trade, however, slave breeding increased. And it is said that in Barbados, there were more slaves during the slave breeding period time than when the transatlantic slave trade was in play. This got William Wilberforce thinking about it. Men applied their minds to a way of ensuring they would establish a breeding system. And of course, with this, they turned their minds to slave breeding, which increased the numbers of slaves and gave them the supply of laborers they wanted for the period of time. But there's more. The biological operations of female slaves were closely tracked to pinpoint the best breeding times. Slaves were kept under tight control and supervision to prevent unauthorized relationships and to enforce selected breeding. Mothers were not allowed to have much contact with their newborns because they were going to be sold off and they did not want them to bond with these children. And of course, this would allow them to be ready for the next breeding period. The biggest and strongest male slaves were chosen to father multiple children to produce robust, profitable offspring for labor. Some breeding farms took requests for customized babies and children based on desired physical or skills attributes. Breeding slaves who resisted were of course severely beaten, and of course many would have passed on during this period. And let me also say the systematic breeding of slaves often created incest upon family members. Oftentimes it's possible that a slave could have been engaged with his niece, uncle. Female slaves were bred repeatedly from puberty, sometimes consecutive matings with different men to maximize pregnancies. This consistent trauma created psychological impact. While records do not exist, historians estimate that hundreds and thousands of enslaved women, men, and children suffered, which denied them of their humanity and, of course, inflicted severe trauma. The pain has been echoed across generations. Uncovering the truth about these grievous crimes and their lasting impacts is necessary to understand the ugly chapter of history and honor those who endured these atrocities. While not much has been documented as it relates to the sexual representation of slaves in the Caribbean, there seems to be a lot of movement as it relates to Black folklore, to new media representation as it relates to sex and slavery in the United States. As a matter of fact, there have been several publications and works that have studied this. For example, there is a folklore regarding the fornication contest, and it's one such tale that there's a collection of versions of the story from the 1960s to the 1970s. But in this case, this particular white man did not believe it, and his friends did not believe it. They had a contest, of course. This folklore has a lot of derogatory terms, but I put a link in my description section. Their strength and resilience in the face of this humiliating time should always be remembered as a part of the legacy of slavery. We should never forget what they went through, because if we forget, then we're forgetting part of ourselves. Just imagine being forced into something that you didn't want to do. Just imagine those individuals are your ancestors, and you should never forget what they went through. Don't live your life without honoring those who've gone before.